Welcome back to Stories from the Field, the Superintendent Podcast, where we look at public education through the lens of equity and through the eyes of the superintendent.
And we've been, you and I both, traveling the country, meeting and seeing some of our superintendent members. So you were just in Denver, right near me. And what was it like?
There's a lot going on in Denver public schools.
Just a week before students in the state's largest school district head back to school, infighting among Denver school board members intensifies. A board meeting to talk about team building erupts and name calling.
Shots fired inside Denver East High School.
He is not secure. A student has a weapon. We do not know where they are.
Nothing trumps the safety of our young people in this building and the faculty and staff.
We're looking at how this could happen.
I'm afraid for my children to go here
as police search for the accused shooter.
Parents and students are outraged. They have had enough.
Sometimes you just wake up, you don't know if you're next.
The adults in the community are failing our kids.
I'm not looking for accolades. This topic is too important.
Do not cut her mic.
For us.
Do not cut her mic.
A public comment meeting with the DPS board Monday showed just how contentious the decision over school resource officers still is.
If it took 10 years of research to remove SROs from schools, why does it only take 3 months to discount that work?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone.
One by one, demands for change echoed in the room.
I want the board to know that many parents are concerned about our safety in our schools.
Parents haven't been able to share their frustrations directly to the full DPS school board until tonight.
If you don't make changes, what responsibility will you bear when, not if, but when the next shooting happens?
A very dysfunctional board. There is a lot of infighting. There is lack of trust among the board members. This is my 5 dysfunctions of a team. As you can see in this triangle, you have the absence of trust.
They have set a very, very poor example, and this superintendent is also setting a bad example. This culture of this board is downright toxic.
It's people. They all have different opinions, and you can't blame them for thinking or feeling certain ways, but it's all... That just makes it harder that everyone has such strong opinions.
You're never going to make everybody happy with any decision. The skill here, the win as a superintendent, is having most people in the community understand why you're making a decision and at least respecting that you put a bunch of thought and effort into the decision.
Well, and all of this kind of, we've seen it at our events. We've seen firsthand, some of our superintendent members in tears. We've seen it during COVID. We've seen it afterwards. We've seen it on the news. It takes a toll on some of the best leaders in the country. I mean, it just naturally is going to bring you down.
It takes a special person to do this job. It seems the harder the job is, the shorter the tenure is. We're losing so many good people from the job. And, one of the things we're trying to do is highlight how great it can be to be an educational leader, to be a district leader, when you make a great decision for kids and kids do better.
Well, it's just another example of the selfless acts of being a superintendent. You feel all this pressure and frustration, but at the root of what you're trying to do is create a safe and fair environment for kids. And that becomes the forefront of your work, and all the other stuff can be stressful, but that's not the focus.
In today's episode, we're gonna look at this discussion around safety and some of the challenges they faced, and we're going to try to filter through that noise and get to the work and the decisions and the positive impacts for kids. And we're going to tell the story of how Dr. Alex Marrero has led this system. Dr. Marrero, thanks for being here on Stories from the Field.
Yeah, I'll tell you this much, Doug. I believe things happen for a reason. Incredibly grateful. But let me attempt to walk you through this journey. Born Alexis Francisco Marrero Espinal. Yes, I have one of those names. And second, born to Mirta Espinal, became Gomez just so she can stay in the States, and from the Dominican Republic, where my mom is from, and my father is a Cuban refugee from the Marrero boat lift, Marielita. was in and out, mostly out of my life. So mom was really the cornerstone for my brother and I. And we had a beautiful upbringing in the urban jungle and the concrete jungle that is New York City, the Bronx. But in our sweet spot of the Bronx, we were west, north, and we jumped one bridge and we're in Dykeman 207, Washington Heights, and living in that Dominican culture. And in the Bronx, we had Puerto Rican and Black, so it was truly the best. What we didn't know, and not just me, everyone around me, is how incredibly poor and disenfranchised we were, because everybody was. And so if we were renting out rooms and living and sleeping in the living room, that was a good year. And it was a little rougher when we were renting out that living room to sleep like in the kitchen and corridor. Like, it was just, oh, we have to do this again, just to make ends meet. I remember dreading going to Fordham Road, my brother and I, to be mom's translator, to sell Avon. She was an Avon lady. She was very sickly. And we hated it because we wanted to throw the ball around, play stickball, a game called Bitilla, which is with bottle caps. But we were forced to be the translator. And one thing that stuck with mom was 4 for $10. And that was our way of saying, Mom, you go ahead and sell 4 deodorants for $10. And that was one of the major, realizations in which, okay, maybe things aren't as great, right? This American dream that my mom sacrificed for. And so much happened during that time. Mom ultimately passed, and Fordham Road is a very important part of my story because our major clientele to sell Avon was the Sears building and this Fordham Plaza building. And Fordham Plaza is where our clientele was, which folks that look like you now and like me, dressed up. And I would have never guessed that many years after, I would have been in that building, potentially accepting a principalship in a space that didn't exist right behind us, which was our oasis, meaning we used to escape the rug and the carpet that we used to lay out with all these Avon products to avoid the embarrassment of being seen by a peer and just throw rocks and play rock ball, if you will, right? Hitting rocks. And that became a school. Right. So imagine that feeling that a superintendent says, I have a school for you because of your ability to build culture. And she pointed out, and I looked, I'm like, my goodness gracious, that used to be my playground, at least my makeshift playground. So that part of the Bronx not only is significant as a professional, even before that, I never realized what those gates in front of us had in store for me as a scholar. So when I was a college-bound student, had the incredible opportunity to have many options, and decided to go to Fordham because I walked into those gates and I said, oh my goodness, there are trees, there are these cathedrals. I have to stay home. Best decision I made, because shortly after that, my mom passed and I was on my own. And why that's important, because I didn't know where to go. And I was ultimately going to drop out, of course. And I remember going down to the South Bronx to welfare. This is a story I haven't shared. And I said, hey, my mom's passed. I'm by myself and I'm a college student. And I remember how awful I was treated. But I realized that I was also down on my luck like everybody else in that room. They handed me a piece of paper, basic like 3rd or 4th grade arithmetic, did in 2 seconds. And they said, okay, Wise, you know what? Here's another one. And I finished that and I realized, okay, this is going to be my fate unless I do something about it. So the first time that I really went against authority is when I told that counselor, said, listen, I have an opportunity. Up north in the Bronx, I'm a college student. They didn't want to hear it. So I grabbed those $60 in food stamps, which is the emergency fund they give someone who's in an emergency situation. Hopped the train. Statute of limitations over. You can't hold me accountable for that. Yeah. I went to Fordham and I opened up, which is taboo for a Latino male, to show vulnerability. And it was an educator who had doctor in front of their name, someone who was intimidating to me, who just said, no, Alex, you're one of our, you will be one of our success stories. We can't allow you to drop out. So they loaded me up with loans, and I appreciated that because that was enough for me not only to get through the 4 years there, but to also use those proceeds to manage my rent situation. And to this day, I still have that welfare card. It looked nothing like this. Shabby beard, big old hair, eyes in the back of my socket, someone who's down on their luck. That's why I was no better than everybody else in that room. That person who reeked at alcohol, that person who had teeth missing and had a whole bunch of kids, I was no better. The only thing is that I went against the machine, a civil service program that's supposed to help, not realizing that there was potential, at least in me. Best decision I ever made, because as a result of that, I shifted my major from being a business student, I was a business student initially, to education, because I wanted to give that feeling to many others, one by one. And I've been able to do that. So worked my way through New York City, leaped out of New York City Department of Ed, which a lot of people do not do, because I wanted to learn this notion of governance. In New York City, governance doesn't exist, right? It's a mayor, chancellor, a whole bunch of superintendents. Ultimately, you get down to the principal. So I felt cheated as a scholar, as a learner. Learned very quickly that the East Ramapo Central School District is the most challenging district, I think, in the nation. And I went there purposefully. After some of my mentors said, please don't, that's where people go to fail, to die. But what I saw was 90% students of color, close to 100% free and reduced lunch. What I saw is a need there. So I went there, and 2 years, that with the 14 years in New York City, I really do feel that I cut my teeth and I was prepared for anything else. Was recruited to come over to New Rochelle. I eventually became the interim superintendent during the height of the pandemic, going toe-to-toe with former Governor Cuomo.
Yeah.
I have a story to tell. Can I tell that story?
Yeah, I want to make sure people know. New Rochelle was the first outbreak of COVID in the country.
That's part of the story. Okay. So here I am, and I'm tapped because of circumstances to lead the district during the height of COVID. And we had the first confirmed case. Phone rings, and it's Governor Cuomo. You're a New Yorker. You understand how much of a big deal that is, right? Right. So no, and this was before the Emmy Award-winning Cuomo, right?
Yeah.
This was Cuomo, the second to Marrero Cuomo, and now they even changed the name of the bridge. I've heard, right? It's ridiculous.
The Tappan Zee Bridge.
Tappan Zee for life.
We all
for
call
me,
it Tappan
right?
Zee.
It's the tap. So Cuomo's on the phone saying, Mr. Superintendent, I have to close your schools. We have the first confirmed case of COVID. Now, I have to admit that I was not on board and I wasn't a believer in terms of what was going to happen to our nation.
How long are you in this job at this point?
Months, if that, maybe weeks.
Yeah.
So the first case was March. I think I assumed, no, it was like 5 months in, because I assumed it in September.
Yeah.
But I know what local control is. And duly elected boards that I'm responsible for who represent the community that I serve. I'm no different than every other educator, a public servant. So I said, I want to say that I sounded like this, Mr. Governor. But surely it was like, Mr. Governor. I don't think you have that authority. I respond to a duly elected board, and no, I have to first make a recommendation. They have to endorse that. And he didn't like that very much, so he hung up the phone. Eventually later, he's probably went to his advisors and lawyers, and this is where Governor Cuomo, the Cuomo that we've learned, that he will not be defeated. He said, you're right, Mr. Superintendent, second call. However, I have just declared that an epicenter, containment zone, and I'm sending the National Guard, so good luck keeping those schools open. So, right, he won that one, right? He won that battle. But clearly he lost the war, didn't he?
Sure.
Right?
Yeah, right.
So during that case, it was still a blur to me. It was making sure that we do what's best in response, and it was a race to see who gets the students back in first. I think if we were not number one, we were one of the first in that lower Hudson, New York region to return students. And I hate to say going to war, but conflict with, of course, our educators and our unions. But I had youngsters. I had that little one who was even younger than that, who I was thinking, okay, crisscross applesauce on the colorful rug, that's how you learn to read. That's how you learn as an educator to nurture those, and that's how you instill what it is to be an educator. I'm not okay with him or anyone else having a false start to the to the on-ramp to this incredible experience in this American society of public education. So I was a strong advocate. We have to bring the kids back. We have to, and it proved to be worthwhile. Although, some relationships were ruined or didn't get the opportunity to blossom as a result. What it did, it put me, I'm not going to say on a national platform, but it got the attention where it needed.
Right.
And here's where I'm going to give kudos and ultimately why I'm here. Richard Carranza was the New York City chancellor at that time.
Yep.
We joke with each other that I was on route out of New York City when he was coming in. So I never worked under him, but we were superintendent colleagues, although he's a chancellor and we're in the region, so we developed a relationship. He's someone who I've always looked up to because he's paved the way as a Latino leader who has been courageous and unapologetic in terms of his approach. I received a call from someone saying, hey, your guy, referring to him, is in trouble. Now, I didn't know what was going on. I felt terrible as a friend and a peer, because I'm focused on district and ensuring that I even land my role, because I was an interim superintendent.
Sure, yeah.
And I sent a text saying, hey, I'm hearing rumors. Hopefully that's not the case. Let me know how I can help. And unfortunately, the next day, there was the announcement. Now, his announcement for departing was because of the impacts of COVID, but I felt like I missed that opportunity to be engaged. He responded a week or so later. He said that he recommended me for New York City to Mayor de Blasio.
Wow.
And that was my reaction. I go, what did I just read here? Right? Never in a million years that I think that I can even dance. I'm happy to even have a conversation with you, that you know who I am. And for you to feel that I can do this is a huge, 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 like, boost to my confidence during that time. And I said, well, if he thinks I can do that, then maybe I'm selling myself short and perhaps I can have a greater impact. And I saw one posting in the very first superintendent search for a search firm. Happened to be a minority woman-owned business, a Dominicana, first superintendent search. And I just jumped in there. 7 grueling interviews later, I got the job. Right? Yeah. And I want to give credit to Denver Public Schools because what I think they did well, I'm thrilled that it was me, obviously, right? Yeah. But what they did well was hire someone from the outside. I knew these many folks here in Denver.
Yeah, right.
So what I've learned is there's a tremendous amount of allegiances, and promises to be kept. From the educational reform movement that was here for the past decade and a half, to those who you grow up with in terms of your trainings, your scholarly work, and even your educational background. And I'm even will go on a limb saying even those that you've had relationships with. You define what relationships are, but even if it's very, very intimate relationships, I had none of that. So that's how I got here. I believe it was partly because of circumstance, but also a nudge. I would say a kick in the hiney from someone who's been proven to be a disruptor.
So it sounds like you have to be a disruptor to really affect change in the role of superintendency.
Sometimes, and I can tell you, Dr. Marrero made a lot of changes very quickly.
And I'm assuming these changes were for the better?
There are a lot of opinions about what Dr. Marrero has done since he's been there, and there are some who believe that the changes he's made have not been good for the district, but Dr. Marrero is doing what he's doing because he believes it's best for kids.
Ultimately, it did help me, and to this day, it is, because I'm building relationships, I believe, where it matters. And I hate to say, in this role, you have to not make enemies, but also put to the side those distractors. So I've been able to make those decisions based on my observations and interactions. However, Doug, initially, it was not easy.
Yeah.
So for those who are aspiring to lead, if you have the ability and you have the will, terrific, just know what you do not know. And I want to repeat that. You do not know what you do not know. So if you're coming into a place in which you're the outsider, be prepared to be the outsider. So before I packed up in New York and came on over, I was greeted with quite a bit of attempts and some news coverage of that they didn't want me. Even from the Latino community, which was very difficult for me to accept and even understand why. and it was a bit more of, I'm Afro-Latino, right? From the Caribbean, Cubano, Dominicano, and you would say from the slums of the Bronx. And here, there's a Southwest Mexican, Chicano, very strong movement.
Yeah.
And I remember actually Richard Carranza having that in reverse, right? That our Dominican, Puerto Rican were saying, he's Mexican, he's not one of us. And I remember I had to speak to my mentor saying, oh, don't you dare do that, right? Because he has the same values that we have, and quite frankly, the same struggles, if not, harder obstacles to overcome. And I was greeted with that type of reception when I initially came in. It was hard for me not to be that person to say, okay, well, I'm gonna show you. So I showed a little bit more, I guess, a more of a sensitive and vulnerable approach, and I gave everybody the benefit of doubt, and I put that aside, although it did bother me. So we have to be prepared to be the person on the outside. Shortly after joining, as much as I do appreciate the former leadership, and I mean that genuinely, never judge those who sat in the seat before you. I would never do that. I wish them well, and I wish I can have them right next to me so I can pick their brain just to ask why said decision. But you don't know what the stressors are unless you're in the seat.
The context shifts every month.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And every couple of years, policy could shift because the makeup of the board could shift. Yeah. Right? So I'm never going to judge prior leadership. But what I can say is that I needed to establish my roots and my team. So 6 months in, I announced a reorganization. Yes. And it was a pretty bloody reorganization, but it was necessary. It resulted in $9 million of savings because we were very bloated here in central office, but it also allowed me to restructure my immediate team. Everyone had to reapply. And then
everyone out here had to reapply.
Everyone. I think only one person from the former administration survived that reorg.
How many pink slips did you give out?
78.
Wow, 78 pink slips. Must have been quite a situation. Did people have to reapply?
It's tough. It's really tough. And yes, some people were offered the opportunity to reapply for jobs in the schools. His big picture operating thesis was that we needed more resources spent in the schools and less at district office. But it's a very tough thing to bring a community through, partially because these are all people who live in the community. These are people's relatives and family members and friends, and it was a bold decision to make in the first year of a superintendency.
So how did he get to know the district before he just came in and made, such big decisions?
Everything he has done in these first couple of years, his board has been on board with, or the majority of his board has been on board with, right? So he's acting on things that the board wants him to do. But, he did what, this is a common theme through all these episodes. We're learning about how these superintendents who are at the top of their game make these decisions. Listening tour. He went and visited everybody. He got to know everybody in the entire district as well as he could. Go visit all the different buildings and departments. See, what this department did. Talk to the food service staff in this school. He was really intentional and pretty thorough. Dr. Marrero puts in a lot of hours in this job and has since day one, and that listening tour informed him about what he thought the district needed. He went to the board, made recommendations, they signed off on them, and here we are.
It's not easy. It's not easy. It's one of the worst parts of the job. Terminating, whether it's justified or because of circumstances.
I mean, for all of us, but you did it for kids, not for shareholders.
$9 million goes a long way. Yes, we have $1.3 billion, but $9 million, I don't care if it's 50 years from now.
Right.
There's an M after that number. When I got on board, I was given the opportunity to engage in a listening and learning tour, a real deep listening and learning tour, even beyond the 100 days that is typical. Why? Because I wanted to make sure that I heard from those marginalized communities that usually do not feel or have access. I had a theory that became fact, and it's fact across the nation. Those who know how to navigate the system, those who have access to players, whether it's superintendent's office or board members, and those who are loud enough or obnoxious enough get heard. We heard them yesterday night at the board meeting. What I wanted to hear is everyone else. One remarkable, when I met not only with the LGBTQ community, but also the parents of those students, when they said, oh, yes, Yeah, our experience is very different than someone else. When I went down to the southeast to the mosque, and we had to go a second time because out of culture and respect, they just were expecting me to tell them what's happening in the district. And no, this is you telling me what you would like for your students. Those are two examples. And going deep down the southwest to the Native American community, who has an incredible history here, to make sure that they were heard. So I extended that, gathered a tremendous amount of data, then assembled a transition team consisting of 60 individuals, internal and external, and headed by three, one who's a former superintendent here, interim superintendent, and two college professors, renowned, three individuals broken up into three categories. Of course, everything that is learning, right, academics, equity, everything around equity, and one around operations. And I said, here, a whole bunch of data that I gathered, plus here's some existing data points, like the Bailey report, which I have right here, the Bailey report in her dissertation, the late, great Dr. Sharon Bailey. Tremendous amount of data gathering, and I asked them, all right, synthesize, give me 10 priorities. That was phase 2, and those 10 priorities ultimately became the strategic roadmap that you have right behind you. And in there, consistently, there were two themes. We need to streamline central office. We're bloated, so I was justified in that reorg, but also that we need to focus and do better and mean equity when we put equity into practice. And let me just define education reform. I'm all for it, right? It's here. In Denver, there are different definitions for words that are common across the nation. Okay. That being educational reform. Here, it means a charter movement. Okay. No, we can be reformers in terms of our approach around education in so many ways. But here is defined that was charters. what charters did to get into power and to create charters. Also, innovation, autonomy, and flexibility all are synonymous here. And that's also tied into the Innovation Act and schools being the agent of change here. Okay. Which again, I was an autonomous principal. I subscribed to that. But I also had guardrails. When I went too far in my crazy practices, I got a call, and that lovely lady who said, I'm gonna give you a shot, said, what are you doing? I go, oops, sorry, went too far, right? So I think there needs to be a balance. Okay. So that was the big challenge towards the second half of that first year, which I believe is where some of my colleagues acknowledged some of the great work, because I was able to take it head on.
Yes, the courageous superintendent, the inaugural winner.
That's right.
Because you came in here and did, for your first, well, you just told us a story about, I'm in New Rochelle, New York, which is not a large place, but it's a city in New York. And then to come in here, a lot of people would come in the first year and coast and be like, let me get the lay of the land. And, this is like we were saying before we got on the camera here. You can tell you're doing a good job because you're disrupting things. And you said last night's board meeting was pretty tame. By
comparison, it was. And another thing about Denver, and this could happen, I guess, across the nation, but not my experience out east, is it's very political.
It's a common issue with districts all over the country. Politics coming into education. The Rand Corporation did this study of surveying superintendents, and the highest number ever of superintendents are considering leaving the job. And by far the top issue making them want to leave the job is political stuff. And these folks they didn't get into this job to be dealing with politics. They got into this job to help kids learn. And this is a constant theme, and it's growing and growing in every district across the country. It doesn't matter if it's red, blue, purple, whatever. There's something political going on in so many districts right now, and it's just such a challenge.
But so sad too. The kids are never the issue, we're always going back to this. How do we get politics out of education?
Yeah, and it's never kids. Usually not kids bringing the political stuff. It's the adults. It's very complicated though, because it touches on some very important, heartfelt issues like LGBTQ plus kids and race and socioeconomic diversity and challenges. There's a lot of flack coming at the superintendent and board from all different directions, but Dr. Marrero's got a pretty thick skin, and he's got a pretty great attitude about all of it in spite of it.
And I have a triangle to fit into. Up here, north, educator. right? That's our core function, our core business. Down here, we can say politician, over here, business person, right? We have to dance in that arena. It's $1.3 billion. My colleagues are the mayor, and of course, our core function is education. So well prepared, but this educational system is politicized more so than out east. A lot goes into a board campaign, and there's a lot of opinions. First time that I've really seen major outlets, media outlets, not only polling board members, polling superintendents, but also supporting and advocating and really sponsoring and endorsing candidates. Doesn't happen out east.
Right. Yeah.
Have you ever heard the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times saying, I'm going to go with Doug?
Yeah, no.
It just doesn't happen, right? So you need to realize what you do not know, and you have to be prepared to dance in that arena. So I had to shift there. But in terms of validation, I remember a key player here was trying to convince me just, hey, you need to look at the polls. And I'm like, polls? I'm not an elected official. No different than the bus driver, paraprofessional teacher. I just have 7 bosses as opposed to everyone else who has 1 boss. Right? Well, your polls are split. No, you have 14% people who love you, maybe 14 or 15%.
They do polls on you?
Exactly. Yeah. Isn't that unheard of?
You like the superintendent, but they don't vote for you.
Exactly. So when I see 14 and 14 even split, and everybody in the middle is either neutral or doesn't care, it's a huge win for me, Doug. Right? Because I'm the person who ultimately closes school, who recommends termination. Yeah. Now, I'm the bearer of bad news for many, right? So if it's an even split like that, boy, was that encouraging. That person thought he was going to scare me away.
Yeah. Right.
But yesterday evening in all the board meetings, the validation comes when not that I'm yearning to be yelled at or be criticized. Right. But you have to be prepared, and you have to have not only the tough skin, but take it as feedback and turn off that switch when you leave that boardroom. When people are disgruntled, they will let you know. When people feel like you've hurt them in whatever way, they will let you know, and they'll be vicious. They'll spew venom. So we're always going to hear that. What you don't hear is someone who's, everything is copacetic. Right. And seldomly do you hear someone who's excited about the work. So just be prepared that all your great work is not going to be echoed, because people are not going to go out their way because they're content. And even those who have no qualms, you won't hear from them. You'll surely hear from those who are upset. And that's what we've been hearing for the past 2 years. But I'm upsetting what needs to be upset. So although some of it does resonate because it could have been a mistake by me and my team, the majority is validation. I was brought here to be a unifier and a disruptor. I know those are competing priorities, but a disruptor because what was happening was not working. So when I get that feedback, it's an encouragement. Yeah. I need to continue to be as disruptive to the system until we can recalibrate. And unifying in terms of that whole reform definition here. Charter, innovation zone, innovation status, district run, those are 4 different types of schools that I have. And the way I see it, we all serve our students. So they're my family of schools. So what we have to take criticism, whether it's through a media outlet or a board meeting, we have to quickly decipher if it's genuine feedback, and feedback is a gift, so we welcome that. But also a lot of it's coming from a place of being disgruntled, or I'm going to say it, absolute fabrication. There's a lot of motive here in Denver, right? So if you can very quickly piece it together, saying, okay, this person works for this organization, which is funded by this organization, which comes from, let's say, dark money, and they have a motive because they were perhaps in control, they're no longer in control. Not to dismiss it, because everybody's important and valuable, but it's not going to be the first thing that I'm going to debrief in the following day, right? So, honey, it's better than vinegar, as they say, right? Yeah. I welcome folks to engage in thoughtful, productive feedback, even if it's critical. The approach matters, right? It's easy for us to not dismiss, but to focus on what we need to. There's so many competing priorities. And ultimately, I think we're doing a big, big disservice to education. In the Dominican Republic, when I've been there, and in Cuba, that's the case, I've been there as well. Definitely in South Korea when I visited. And Brazil, where I had the opportunity to visit as well. as an educator. There's this respect and reverence towards the profession. Yeah. Like the medical field, like the lawyer field, like an duly elected outside of education field. Mm-hmm. Not here. It seems as of late, everyone wants to throw stones or cast judgment or say, I can do it better than you. Yep. Until we as a society shift that, we're in big, big, big trouble. Right? Not to say that I condone this, but I've seen it down in the third world countries, down the Caribbean. Not only is she your mom, parent to son, she's your mom, she's your teacher, she's everything. Yeah. Until you get home. Right? Yep. And they're not going to question that educator. We need to shift to that, or we need to learn from others, because right now education is being targeted and we're at a crisis because we're being responsive and reactionary because we have no choice. But education, public education, is the only thing that was in the cards for me. And although I had to navigate the system and maybe there was a little bit of luck there, it worked for me.
Where would you be without public education?
Lord knows. I will be where Miguel, Gregory, Emmanuel, and someone who referred to as Viejo. Mm-hmm. And half of those names that I mentioned are not here or incarcerated. That's exactly where I would have been.
When superintendents who've come from challenging backgrounds tell the story of how they end up sitting in this seat running a large school district, and to hear Dr. Marrero talk about, how he came up as a kid and then how education really delivered him to success, and now he's able to kind of pay that forward to thousands and thousands of young people.
There's a lot of people coming at him just from all different angles.
We're here to filter through that and to talk about some of the really bright spots, the great work happening in DPS that sometimes can get buried by the noise. Certainly, we all know the national media loves a scandalous story, and they love to talk about things that are negative, that get eyeballs on stories online. But these other things we're going to share in these next couple episodes about all of their work around sustainability, the student-run farming that they're doing. All this stuff is really great work that we're here to kind of shine a light on. But before we do that, it's one of the most difficult things that anybody in this job goes through. Anytime that students are in danger. This story of this shooting on a DPS campus made national news, and a lot of people heard about it, but we want to take time to tell the story from the perspective of the superintendent of schools who had to be on site and try to make sure that everybody was as safe as possible. And I think you're going to hear how difficult this was in this next piece.
So join us on the next episode of Stories from the Field, the Superintendent Podcast, where we explore how this incident really put Dr. Marrero to the test.